having a discussion about the Tibetan Policy and Support Act, which is currently moving through Senate. And today we have invited some special guests to join us for an English language discussion. And kind of the main purpose for discussion is to really increase grassroots involvement and try to help push the bill through Senate in any way that we can. As a community of Tibet supporters, we have a lot of amazing youth activists that are working on Tibetan Policy and Support Act and helping to get it passed in their local areas and regions by garnering support. And so in particular today we have 5 youth leaders from different key states, and I want to take a moment to acknowledge that SFT has so many amazing youth leaders around the US and around the world that are working really hard for Tibet. In particular in US there are many chapters and a lot of chapter leaders that are kind of working on TPSA, and today's selection of guest youth speakers are actually specifically selected because they are actually all from states and constituents in states where one of their members of Senate is on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So they will be, instrumental. Those senators are instrumental in helping the Tibetan Policy and Support Act move to the next level. So today's discussion is really to kind of see how these youth leaders and how other members, Tibetans and Tibet supporters around the US can use their voices and their involvement and participation in the grassroots level to help get this bill passed together as a team. And later on for the second segment of our live today, we're also going to have a guest speaker, Congressman Jim McGovern. And Congressman McGovern is the member of Congress who introduced TPSA on the House side and helped take a leadership role in getting the bill passed through the House earlier this year. So we're really excited to have the Congressman join us, and it's an incredible opportunity. If we have enough time, there will be a Q&A section as well, where we will take questions from the audience for Congressman McGovern. And hopefully, folks that are viewing live can contribute their thoughts and, tag along with the discussion today as well. And so without further delay, we're going to go ahead and begin today's program. I just want to do a really, really brief introduction for our youth guest speakers. And so I'll just introduce them and they'll say hello so you can see, who they are. So our first guest youth speaker that I want to introduce today is Tenzin Chuki. And Chukila is a Tibetan American from Wisconsin, and she's currently a student at the University of Wisconsin in Madison.
Hi everyone, I'm Chuki.
Thanks, Chuki. Second guest youth speaker today is Tenzin Rabjam, and he is a Tibetan American from Connecticut, and he currently studies at American University in Washington, D.C.
Hello everyone, this is Rabjam.
And the next speaker is Kyla, and she's Kyla Sharab, and she's a Tibetan American of mixed heritage. She's also from Colorado, and she currently serves on the board of the Colorado Tibetan Association.
Hi everyone, I'm Kyla.
Thanks, Kyla. And our next speaker is Siring Lamu, and she's a Tibetan student currently studying at the Earlham College in Indiana.
Hi, this is Siring.
And last but not least, Justin is the next speaker, Justin Marks, and he's an American Tibet supporter and student from Georgia, and he's currently studying at Appalachian State University.
Hey everybody, I'm Justin.
Awesome. Thank you, all the guest speakers, for joining us today. And I know that having such a diverse group of youth students from different key constituencies and states in the U.S. is like a great way to build an enriching discussion. So for the first segment, we just wanted to get to know our youth speakers a little bit better and understand kind of like what type of work they're doing for Tibet, and in particular also a few questions about TPSA. But there's going to be a wide range. So the first question I had today was for Chukila. So I know that you are a Tibetan American student from Wisconsin and you study at UW-Madison, but about a month ago you also joined for the first time the first ever virtual Tibet Lobby Day, which was organized by the International Campaign for Tibet. And I know that must have been a really cool experience, and I just wanted to, mention that's really on the cutting edge of lobbying. Without the pandemic, typically we're used to going in person. So it was a very different experience than most people in the US have never really had that experience. And I wanted to hear a little bit from you about how was that experience for you?
So yeah, initially I was really excited to go to DC, obviously, to represent Tibetan Americans from Wisconsin. But due to the current situation, we had to move everything online. So I was kind of nervous about it in the beginning, just because it was during the time when like universities were closing. So I was kind of on edge on like how everything would work out. But I think ICT did a really good job with planning everything, especially with like the online training videos, which I found to be really helpful. And then they sent us all the documents on like what to cover, especially during all our phone calls. I also had a really group of individuals with me representing Wisconsin, so a lot of people had, so I think 3 or 2 people had done it previously, so they were really willing to like help me out and support me through everything. And because I was the youngest in the group, they wanted me to take a larger role, so I was kind of nervous. But overall, I thought it was a really amazing experience, and I was able to speak to the offices of Ron Johnson and Tammy Baldwin. And everyone was really responsive, and it was also really nice to hear that everyone was like well informed about Tibetan issues. And then I thought it was a good way for me to engage with Tibetan issues, as well as connecting with people of older generation in our community, because one of our group members was the president of the Wisconsin Tibetan Association. So it was really nice to kind of like get to know him better. And then overall, I kind of wanted to like initiate lobbying within our state capital here in Madison, since most events are settled in Madison. So I think it would be a good way for us to kind of like make our mark in Madison and kind of speak for our rights and stuff like that. So I think it was a really good experience, and I'd definitely do it again.
Yeah, it seems like you gained a lot of ideas and, even like new ideas in particular of how to do state level advocacy in state, actually, like meeting with members of Congress and their offices in your home state. That's actually a great tool that I know a lot of communities such as the Boston Tibetan Association have already started using. So yeah, it's really awesome to hear that you had a positive experience.
Yeah.
Awesome. So the next question I had today was for our youth speaker from Connecticut. And Rubjam, I know that just like Chuki, you're also a Tibetan American who grew up in Connecticut. And we actually you and I actually went to university together at American University in Washington, D.C., where we started an SFT chapter at our campus together. And, I remember like being located right in D.C., like, we wanted to do something that could help use our location and help, bring more of a youth voice to advocacy. And our chapter organized the annual event at AU in Washington, D.C. called the Tibetan Youth Summit. I know that, this event has been really successful, and I just wanted to hear, and I'm sure our viewers would, be interested to hear a little bit more about like what is this event about, and kind of like how do you think that the event has been used by the AU chapter to kind of support the advocacy efforts of the Tibetan youth community?
Okay, so as many as you guys know, the Tibetan Youth Summit is an annual conference that's held within our university. And every time we host an event, we have 2 main goals going into this. The first is to empower the youths by equipping them with the necessary skills and tools that are going to prepare them for lobbying. And secondly is to create a platform in which Tibetan youths and supporters can gather together and share each other's experiences in order to move the Tibetan movement forward, right? So, Pemo Domo, I know that like you were present for the entire like making of this event, but for the audience, the story behind the beginning of this event was that as a chapter, we knew that we wanted to help out the Tibetan movement in some way or shape, and we recognized that us being in the unique situation of being in the heart of Tibetan or American politics in DC, we realized that we need to take advantage of that, and we realized that there was already an event that was kind of like taking advantage of that situation, which was the Tibetan Lobby Day. And we realized that, like, we can supplement their entire efforts by hosting our own little workshop specifically for Tibetan youth and supporters. So we realized that many of the individuals that do participate in the entire Lobby Day event, it's either very first time or they're just very inexperienced with the entire lobbying day. So we realized that that's one way that we can help the Tibetan community is by kind of teaching them how and what lobbying really is and how to not perfectly, but like how to actually lobby for their congressmen, for their representatives, for their senators. And I definitely think that overall our impact has really kind of advanced any kind of legislation work, and like especially the TPSA. We have taught these young individuals to go into their congressman's office and kind of support these kind of legislations. So it definitely has the advantage and has really had a big impact on these kind of actions.
Yeah, thanks, Rabjam. So building an additional support system and training mechanism for younger Tibet supporters and Tibetans that want to lobby for Tibet-related bills.
Yeah, definitely. And plus, we've had multiple speakers come in from different movements too, not just the Tibetan movement, so we can see the intersection between those two movements and how us lobbying for our own movement helps and contributes for other groups too. So,
thank you, Rabjam. So I just want to give a quick update. We have just over 90 viewers on our live right now. And thank you for everyone for the positive comments and the words of support from around the world. And in about just over 15 minutes or so, Congressman McGovern is also going to be joining us. So before then, we have a few more questions for the youth leaders about their work in the Tibetan movement and in advocacy. So yeah, thank you for joining us. The next question that I have today is for Kyla Sharab, and I know that you are a Tibetan of mixed heritage, and you were also born and raised in Colorado, where there's not a ton of Tibetans. Actually, the Tibetan community is on the smaller side. But when I met you, we were actually in Dharamsala while you were serving at the Central Tibetan Administration, the Tibetan government in exile, through the Tibet Corps program. And I was really interested to hear, about what were some of the biggest takeaways and inspirations that you found during your time in Dharamsala, and how are you able to bring them back to Colorado with you to the community and to the larger community in Colorado beyond Tibetan community as well?
Yeah, I think that it was such an educational experience in every way that it could be. Sort of the largest, first of all, getting to be able to kind of be at the heart of the Tibetan government in exile was huge in terms of learning about kind of how it's structured and how it works, and the history of it, and the different nuances of how people contribute to the Tibetan community at large. I think the biggest takeaway for me was being able to meet young Tibetans, especially from all parts of the world. So, obviously I was able to meet young Tibetans that lived in India, Tibetans that came from, Europe, America, obviously, and to kind of be able to see how every person that I met during my time there really was motivated and wanted to make a difference and wanted to contribute to their community in whatever capacity they could. And being able to see kind of how that played out and how meaningful that was definitely motivated me to do something when I came back home to Colorado. And I think even more than that, it made me realize I have so much to learn even as I come back to my community. The board for the Tibetan Association of Colorado, we have 2 young members, myself and my cousin, and then the rest is part of the older community. And I think it's an awesome platform to be able to kind of create a dialogue and learn from each other, and help grow our community in Colorado and educate each other and everyone that's there. So I think really it was seeing all the young Tibetans that have such a diverse range of experiences, but at the same time, everyone wants to make a difference. So being able to recognize that, the learning really never stops, and to be able to help and grow and challenge yourself in whatever capacity you can is something that's super worthwhile, and really motivating.
Thanks, Kyla. I think it's really awesome that, in recent years, especially, we've been seeing more and more Tibetan Americans, especially young people, joining the associations of their local communities. And I think the coolest thing, in my opinion, is seeing the intergenerational collaboration and teamwork of many of these associations that are made up of, Tibetans that have been around living in exile in India and the U.S. for decades, and then those that have spent most of their life in the U.S. And are, in their 20s or early 30s. So I think it's such a cool, amalgamation of different backgrounds, and that really propels our movement forward, I think. Yeah. Thank you, Kyla.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of potential.
Awesome. And for the viewers, I know that we're going through, the questions pretty quickly, and I know we'd all love to hear a lot more from each of the guest youth. But just because we have the Congressman joining us at 12:30, we want to make sure that we can hear a little bit of the background of each of our youth speakers before we start the segment with Congressman McGovern. So the next question I had today was for our guest speaker, Tiring La. And so Tiring is currently a student at Earlham College, but I know that in our discussions, Tiring, I know that you shared with me that you were actually born in Tibet and you're now living in Indiana studying. At your college, Earlham College, you actually are one of the leaders of the SFT chapter on your campus with some of your peers, as are many of our other youth speakers. So many young Tibetans growing up in Western countries today, like myself, have been denied access to Tibet and have never actually been to Tibet. But you spent, many of your early years there. And I was just curious, as someone who's quite different in background from myself, I wanted to hear a little bit more and ask, do you feel like, your early years growing up in Tibet helped influence your interest and motivation to join the Tibetan movement, and in particular to engage in Tibet advocacy work like how we're doing now with TPSA?
Hi. So SFT has been always a great motivation for me to get involved in Tibet movement. And I'm so glad that I get to lead the SFT chapter in our college. When I was in Tibet, I remember having the Chinese Communist little posters in our home, and I wasn't aware about anything about Tibet. But then after fleeing to India and studying in a Tibetan community, it taught me a lot about Tibet. As for me, my family is still in Tibet, and it is always quite risky for me to get involved in Tibet movement if I ever want to go back to Tibet. So it is always quite risky, but then at the same time, I feel responsible to represent the unheard voices from inside Tibet. And just today, I read an article from Payu. It said that Chinese authorities have targeted between 4,000 to 5,000 households in Tibet who has family ties outside of Tibet. So like this, getting in touch with my family on a daily basis is always a struggle. I can't just casually send them a message on a daily basis. I have to be cautious about it. And just like that, I've also noticed how my siblings are getting more fluent in Chinese than Tibetan. So this kind of small examples always helps me to do something about Tibet movement, because now I'm outside of Tibet and I have this platform. So yeah, this has always inspired me to fight for Tibet movement and spread awareness of Tibet's human rights issues and climate issues on a bigger platform. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing, Tiring. I know for myself as a Tibetan who lives in exile and was born and raised in a free country, I think it's the stories like yours that really inspire me. Tibetans that join the movement and call for human rights and freedom, or even knowing the great risks that they face or their family faces. So thank you for joining us today to help advocate for TPSA, and it means a lot to have you here. I also just wanted to add that, similar to how Tiring was saying, there are actually over 1,000 known Tibetan political prisoners inside Tibet today. And there are probably countless more that are unknown right now or not official. So thank you, Tiring La, for sharing your story.
Thank you.
And so our next question is for Justin. And Justin, I know you actually founded the SFT chapter on your campus as well, Appalachian State University in Boone, North Carolina. And it's almost quite the opposite of Tiring, because you seemingly don't have many connections directly to Tibet at all. I know that your family is from Florida and Georgia, and growing up, you didn't have that many direct links to Tibet or the Tibet movement, right?
Right. I didn't know about the Tibet movement until I got to state. I never knew about it until I was almost 20 years old, which blew my mind.
Yeah, and then in the past year, since you've been joining SFT's campaigns and doing chapter work in North Carolina and in Georgia, I've seen you do a really great job engaging and educating friends and family members and classmates, and even your fraternity brothers about the Tibet issue. And I guess my question for you today is, and for our viewers might be interested, as a non-Tibetan or as someone who seemingly doesn't have much of a direct connection to the Tibet movement, how do you approach the challenge or tackle the challenge of engaging members of your community on the Tibet issue?
I really, my only goal is to just have as many conversations with my communities as possible. Like I said, I didn't know about the Tibet issue until I got into college, and I don't think that only people that have the privilege of attending a college should know about the Tibet issue. So I really just try and have conversations with everybody that I know, be it family, friends, or fraternity brothers. And yeah, it's just like Thanksgiving conversations with my family. My Nana, she never knew about the issue, and I love talking to her about it. And she gets passionate with me, and we just talk about how it's glaring injustice that needs to be addressed and there needs to be change. So my Nana has supported me in my efforts to fight for Free Tibet for the past year. She sends me like Free Tibet shirts and hoodies, and I love sharing articles with her. But really, it's just about reaching out to as many people as you know and spreading awareness, because small acts can create big change. So I just keep having the conversation, keep trying to educate myself, and talk to as many people as I know about the Free Tibet issue.
Absolutely, Justin. Yeah, and I know especially with a campaign like TPSA, where we really need to get the word out to voters and to people who might not be connected to the Tibet issue directly, but are represented by these senators. We really need them to, support the bill and write to their senators. So that's kind of a great way where having these anecdotal conversations and one-to-one engagements can be really helpful. Thank you, Justin. So before we go to the next question, I just want to announce that we have, over 100 viewers with us today, and they're watching from all over the world, not only the US, but we also have viewers tuning in right now from Sweden, India, France, and many other countries and cities around the world. So thank you everyone who's watching and, supporting the youth leadership, the grassroots leadership for TPSA. And so we have, a little bit more time before the Congressman joins us, and we've heard a little bit about the background of some of our speakers today, our youth guests. I also wanted to just take a couple minutes to ask some questions about the bill, TPSA itself. So for viewers that are not as familiar, TPSA is, the topic of today's discussion. It stands for the Tibetan Policy and Support Act. And I just wanted to ask, so Rubjan, I would be great to hear, especially for our viewers, a little bit more about TPSA and what TPSA is.
Okay, so TPSA just has been recently passed by the House in January, and it's now going to be read by the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations. And the act calls for three main things. First is to establish an American consulate in Lhasa, which is to increase the American presence within the area. And the second is to block Chinese interference with the succession of the Dalai Lama and to affirm Tibetan Buddhist rights to practice their faith without interference from the Chinese government. And then lastly is key provisions that would protect Tibetan environment, especially its rivers, and to protect the frontline communities that are impacted by climate change. So that's basically a summary of the act.
It's awesome. I mean, it seems like TPSA really covers, so much ground. And like in particular, the second one that you mentioned, I think is really important because it would really be like a cutting edge, groundbreaking legislation about the reincarnation of Tibetan leaders, such as His Holiness the Dalai Lama even. So, if passed, TPSA would, create official U.S. foreign policy stance that any reincarnate of His Holiness or any other Buddhist leaders that's appointed by the CCP would be rejected. And they would only accept, the ones that are appointed by the Tibetan community and the Tibetan Buddhist community itself. So that's, plays a huge role in freedom of religion for Tibetans around the world. Thanks
Definitely.
for sharing that, Rabjam.
Yep.
And then the next question would be, I guess, for Justin. And as we talked about earlier, you don't have as much of a direct connection to Tibet, and yet you've participated in the virtual Tibet Lobby Day for advocating and lobbying for TPSA with your members of Congress, and you're also joining the grassroots effort to lobby for TPSA with your community members prior to Thursday's Senate hearing. So I'm just curious to hear a little bit more. What what inspired you or motivated you to support TPSA as a bill?
Right. Well, like you said, I'm from Georgia. State as the late great Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And he says that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And we've already seen injustice in Tibet with the Chinese government trying to fight the Panchen Lama. And I just think that His Holiness the Dalai Lama, it's a right of Tibetan Buddhists to figure out who is his successor. And so I just want to do my best to advocate for TPSA because it seems like a great common sense bill that just protects the religious freedom of Tibetans. And also, I am a sustainable development major, and I do see the big glaring threat of climate change, and to have that in a bill in Tibet as well to protect Tibetan rivers was just inspiring for me to see. I think it's an amazing bill, so I'm just going to try and do my best to get it passed. And that's why I did Lobby Day. That's why I'm going to try and get more support for the bill because it's a great bill, and I think it would create positive change in Tibet.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear. It's kind of like the shared values of religious freedom and protecting the environment that really spoke to you about this bill. I also wanted to highlight that one more, provision within the bill is, a message of support for the Tibetan community in exile's dedication to democracy and the strong sense of democracy and democratic value within the Central Tibetan Administration in Dharamsala. So it commends His Holiness and the Central Tibetan government in exile officially for their strong work to protect democracy in exile. So the next question I had was for Tiring La from Earlham. And so the question was just that, as you mentioned, you had lived in Tibet in the past and you also have family in Tibet, but now you're based in Indiana, going to Earlham College, and the community there, you have a lot of classmates and peers who are, from the U.S. They're Americans, and from Indiana, and many of them are voters as well. So I was just curious to know, what type of projects or initiatives you were planning on, hoping to do in Indiana that might help raise awareness about TPSA amongst your classmates, your friends, your peers here in the U.S.
So I think right now, since we are all in quarantine, so social media works the best, and I would like to advocate through sending messages directly to my friends so that they can spread it to their families, and then that will become a big, huge number of people supporting the TPSA. And also, in our club, in our Alham SFT club, we have quite a few diverse number of people, not only students from US, but there's a lot of students from international, so supporting Tibet issues. So I think through advocating through the diverse numbers of people, it will be more diverse supporting the Tibet. Yeah.
I love that idea, using the quarantine.
Yeah.
Hello. How are you?
We're great. How are you?
We're doing okay. Everybody, I hope everybody's healthy and safe.
Oh yeah, same to you as well. I can see we're all in quarantine in our respective homes.
I know, and I'm out of my uniform. I'm not wearing my sport coat and tie. So, but I don't feel comfortable walking around my house in a coat and tie. So.
Oh, well, thank you so much for joining us today, Congressman McGovern. We have 5 youth leaders here with us, and they're all from different states. We have Justin from Georgia, Kyla from Colorado, Chuki from Wisconsin, Rabjam from Connecticut, and Tiring from Indiana. And they'll each introduce themselves again as well for you when they ask their question. But I know, with the news about TPSA, coming coming onto the agenda at the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, coming pretty last minute. This talk was put together really quickly, and it means so much to us that you were able to join us in person. And I know that shows, your commitment and support for youth grassroots efforts and leadership in the U.S. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you, and I want to thank you for your activism and for your passion and for standing up for human rights. I think it's so incredibly important, and so you have my admiration and respect. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to join all of you here today to talk a little bit about the Tibetan Policy and Support Act that will soon be considered by the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So that's imminent. Students for a Free Tibet has played an important role in mobilizing the support for this legislation. Some of you I've dealt with in person, but I know all of you have lobbied in your respective states so that we could have a vote in the House that was successful. And your advocacy obviously is appreciated, and it will be essential in moving this forward and getting the bill signed into law. So I'd like to also take this moment to thank the Tibetan associations across the country that contributed more than $35,000 to Meals on Wheels to help vulnerable Americans during the COVID-19 pandemic. In these trying times, it is gestures like that uplift our spirits and reaffirm our shared humanity, and I think remind us about the goodness in people. But as many of you know, one of the issues that I've worked on throughout my career that is very close to my heart is the issue of food insecurity and hunger, not just in the United States, but globally as well. And in the United States, I'm sad to say that even before this pandemic, we had close to 40 million people who didn't know where the next meal was going to come from. A lot of them are senior citizens. I'm a big supporter of the Meals on Wheels program, but I want to thank you for again displaying what is the best in all of us. And so thank you, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Great, thank you so much. And for the viewers as well from home, we have over 100 viewers from around the U.S. and around the world tuning in right now. I just want to introduce Congressman McGovern officially. So Congressman McGovern has, served in U.S. Congress since 1996, representing the Massachusetts 2nd Congressional District. And even long before his time in Congress, the Congressman has always been an avid supporter of human rights. And in addition to being a member of Congress, Congressman McGovern also serves as the co-chair for the CECC, the Congressional Executive Commission on China. And he also serves as well as the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission. And he's also the recently appointed chair of the Rules Committee in the House of Representatives. And I think many in the Tibet community know that Congressman McGovern's team has a great track record on the Tibet issue, and they did a great job leading the Reciprocal Access to Tibet Act, which many Tibetans and Tibet supporters around the U.S. Lobbied for, and helped get it passed through Congress, and signed into a law, making it the first standalone bill on Tibet to be passed through Congress, which was incredible. And, in the past, I even interned with Congressman McGovern's office, so I've seen firsthand, how hard his team works and how dedicated everyone in his team is to making human rights and Tibet, a focal issue on the Hill. So we actually have some of our questions that are going to be coming directly from our youth leaders today. And so I'm going to pass it over to Chuki from Wisconsin today for our first question for the Congressman.
Hi, I'm Chuki. I'm a student here at the University of Wisconsin. And my first question is, so Congressman McGovern, you were the member of Congress that introduced TPSA on the House side and helped lead the bill through the House. And I know that the CECC has played a huge role in bringing TPSA to Congress under your and Senator Rubio's leadership. What was the main objective or goal when you introduced the bill?
Well, first of all, let me just say I was proud to introduce the bill along with Senator Rubio, and I think it is especially timely as well. As was mentioned, I'm the chair of the Congressional Executive Commission on China, and what prompted me to, to actually think specifically in terms of a legislative response to the deteriorating situation against the Tibetan community was after I did a town hall meeting in New York City with the Tibetan community from New York and from New Jersey, and it was a very informative event for me. I did some talking, but I did a lot of listening too, and you know, and we in that town hall meeting we discussed the possibility of legislation and building upon the ideas that I heard from the members of the community. We began writing this bill. And the concern has been that the original Tibetan Policy Act of 2002 was in desperate need of an update. We were also growing more concerned by the Chinese government statements that it had the authority to select a successor or reincarnation of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And instead of waiting for that to happen, I believe we need to set U.S. policy on that issue in advance. And, you know, in some aspects of this legislation are incredibly important, such as it establishes as U.S. policy that the succession or reincarnation of Tibetan Buddhist leaders, including the future 15th Dalai Lama, is an exclusively religious matter that should be made solely by the Tibetan Buddhist community. The fact that the Chinese government, they have a role in that is absurd. Also, the bill specifies that the Chinese officials who interfere in the process of recognizing a successor or a reincarnation of the Dalai Lama will be subject to targeted financial, economic, and visa-related sanctions, including those in the Global Magnitsky Act. It also strengthens the role of the State Department Special Coordinator for Tibetan issues, including a mandate to work multilaterally with other governments to promote a genuine dialogue between Tibetan leaders and the Chinese government. It states that there should be no new Chinese consulates in the United States until there's an establishment of a U.S. consulate in Lhasa. This is something I raised in person with Chinese government officials in Lhasa when I took a trip there several years ago with then Leader Pelosi before she was Speaker again. The bill also directs the State Department to begin collaborative multinational efforts to protect the environment and water resources on the Tibetan Plateau. You know, when I last met with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, he talked a great deal about protecting this planet and protecting the Tibetan Plateau in particular. And the bill also supports democratic governance in the Tibetan exile community. I've worked with the Lobsang Sangay and others. They have been very, very effective. I respect them. I always welcome them when they come to Washington. I do believe that they represent the Tibetan community, and so they are always welcome in the capital when they're here. And then finally, the bill authorizes ongoing U.S. appropriations that support Tibetans in Tibet and in South Asia. You know, I've visited Dharamsala, and that's one of many Tibetan communities, but clearly there are needs, and the United States and the international community need to be there to support that community and being able to, whether it's to advance education or protecting culture or language or what have you, we want to be there to be supportive. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. And we actually have a comment from our live stream that I wanted to share with the audience and with you as well. Is Tunduk Law from Amherst wanted to welcome you to the live stream and thank you for spearheading and your leadership on TPSA.
Well, as you know, I represent Amherst among other communities, and I have a very vibrant and wonderful Tibetan community that have taught me a great deal. So it's great to say hello to them too.
Awesome, thank you. And so the next question that we have for you today, Congressman, is going to be from Tiring, who is a Tibetan student from Tibet, who is currently studying in Indiana at Earlham, and she's the one of the leaders of the SFT chapter at her campus in Earlham.
Hi, thank you so much for answering. My question is, I know that the people in our audience today are actually from a diverse background of understanding in terms of U.S. political system and how laws in U.S. are passed. So if you are speaking with someone who did not know much about U.S. politics, how would you explain the process of how bills are passed into laws?
Well, that's a good question. So, you know, as I mentioned, you know, as I mentioned in my previous answer, how we actually decided to introduce the legislation. We did, and we actually we drafted it, and Senator Rubio of Florida introduced it in the Senate. I'm a Democrat; he's a Republican. I think one of the things that I want people to appreciate is that there is genuine bipartisan support for this. I mean, Washington is a pretty polarized place right now, and sometimes Democrats and Republicans can't even agree on what to have for lunch. But we all agree that the human rights situation regarding the Tibetan community is a great concern, and that we need to stand in solidarity with the Tibetans. So I introduced the bill in legislation in September of 2019, and then the bill was passed by the House overwhelmingly in January 2020. And since that time, I've been working with Senator Rubio and discussing with my Senate colleagues about how we can move this bill forward, and talking about potential tweaks in the legislation so that we could, have, once they pass it, we can accept whatever they pass. And it is my hope that the Senate, after they mark up the bill, which is that means that they consider it in committee and make the changes they need to make before they can send it to the Senate floor. But it's my hope that the Senate could pass the bill quickly. I'm obviously concerned that everything is moving a little bit more slowly because of the coronavirus situation, and our legislatures aren't meeting as frequently and as we would otherwise have, and we're limiting the amount of time we're in Washington. But nonetheless, this is an important issue that needs to move forward. And so I think your advocacy to individual senators is important. A lot of people aren't as lucky as I am to have been educated by the Tibetan community, not only in my district but all across the country. And so a lot of people don't know all the details of the issue. And again, with all the other stuff that's going on right now, they're maybe not thinking about Tibet. And so it is important for you, wherever you are, to talk to your United States senators, reach out to them, reach out to their aides, and ask them to get behind this bill, to urge Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell to schedule it for a vote. Have the debate, let's vote on it. And after the bill passes the Senate, I will have discussions with Speaker Pelosi, who has been amazing in her support for this bill, about how to move it forward. And we'll either have a conference committee to work out any differences between the House and Senate bills, or the House could just pass the Senate version and send it directly to the president to be signed. So your direct contact right now with your U.S. senators and their staff is essential.
Yeah, it's really important to hear about ways that the grassroots advocacy plays a direct role into moving that congressional legislative process along. So thank you for sharing that, Congressman. And before we have our next question, I just want to acknowledge as well, in addition to the great youth advocacy work that's been done around the U.S., we've seen strong leadership from ICT as well, in the nation's capital, bringing together these associations. So I wanted to just acknowledge ICT's incredible work.
We love ICT. They're wonderful.
Great. So the next question that we had for you today, Congressman, was from Justin.
Awesome. Hey, Congressman. I'm Justin. I'm from Georgia, and I go to App State in North Carolina. My question is, Tibet supporters around the U.S. have been lobbying for TPSA. I've heard about the direct goals for the impact of TPSA. I wanted to ask, what do you think the passage of TPSA will mean for the bigger picture of the discussion around Tibet on Capitol Hill?
Well, that's a good question. I think, first and foremost, as I said before, passage will send a very strong signal to China that there's bipartisan support for this. Again, it's hard to find bipartisan support for anything nowadays, but there is bipartisan support for this. And that is a tribute, by the way, to many of you who are on this video conference right now. I mean, I know that you've been working these issues, you've been talking to very selected officials, but in any event, that's number one. Number two, one of my frustrations over the years has been that we've had policymakers that like to talk, but don't always walk the walk. So everybody would always say, well, I revere His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Oh, I stand in solidarity with the Tibetan people, but and that's kind of the end of it. I think with the passage of this is that we're taking those nice words, that nice talk, and we're translating it into policy. And I think the other thing is that if the Tibetan Policy and Support Act was signed into law, it would send another clear signal to the Chinese government that there will be consequences to interference in the reincarnation process. And it is my hope that this legislation will not only provide the policy framework for the United States, but for the international community as well. We want other countries to follow our lead on this. I think because again, this legislation provides a mechanism in which consequences can be imposed if China does what it says it might do. And I think up to this point, China maybe was unclear that, for example, if they interfered in the reincarnation process, whether the United States would do anything other than just issue a statement saying it's a bad thing, what they did. This is different. This imposes real consequences. And again, I say this every chance I get. My problem is not with the people, the Chinese people. I've been to China. I mean, I admire the people of China. I respect them, and and it's a very, it's an incredible country. My problem is with the Chinese government that is imposing these terrible policies that deny the average Tibetan their basic human rights. So this basically, if we pass this, it sends a strong message to China that we're serious, that this is more than talk. This is real, and also that it's bipartisan.
Thank you. That was a great answer, Congressman. So for the next question, I just want to pass it over to Kyla.
Hi, my name is Kyla. I'm from Denver, Colorado, and I serve on the Tibetan Association of Colorado over here. My question is, Congressman, I've known about your great activism work dating back to before your time in Congress, and then throughout your time in Congress as well. And as you've consistently been such a staunch activist and advocate for human rights, I'm interested to know kind of what inspired you in your activism work.
Yeah, I mean, I think my mother and father raised me, to respect every single human being on this planet. I mean, that's just the way I was brought up. That everybody is important. That nobody is invisible. That everybody ought to be treated the way I want to be treated. And when I was a young congressional aide working for a congressman from Boston named Joe Moakley, I did a lot of work in Central America. And in the 80s, there were wars going on in places like El Salvador, and a lot of violence. And so I did a lot of human rights work in those countries. I advocated as his aide. I visited the country. I advocated on behalf of people who had been imprisoned unjustly. I advocated on behalf of people who were disappeared, and I tried to raise the issue of human rights. And I felt it was especially important then because the United States government was at that time supporting the Salvadoran government, which was responsible for a lot of the violence. So I thought we had a special obligation to be clear and vocal. In 1989, 6 Jesuit priests and their housekeeper and daughter were murdered at the University of Central America in El Salvador, and Congressman Moakley was asked to do the investigation into it, and I was his staff person. So I spent a good deal of time looking into that, and we found out the truth, which was the Salvadoran armed forces that the United States backed were responsible for the murders, and we exposed the truth. And I think during that experience, I think I came to appreciate how important it is for all of us to care about what is happening in places like El Salvador, and not just what happens in our own neighborhoods, because we're all interconnected. And in this case, we had a responsibility because we were providing assistance to the Salvadoran government. And I always tell people we need to worry about what happens halfway down the block, but sometimes we need to worry about what happens halfway around the world too. And I was horrified by what I witnessed. That good people, that innocent people were being murdered, and that the brutality of the conflict. And I thought then, and I still feel now, that if the United States of America stands for anything, we need to stand out loud and foursquare for human rights. Now, we look back at our history, we haven't always done that. We have a mixed record, if you will. But that doesn't mean that we should forfeit that goal of standing up for human rights. And I think in the long run, it's the right thing to do morally. It's also the right thing to do in terms of creating a world security. In countries where people are being brutalized, at some point, sometimes things blow up, become chaotic, and destabilizing. I think it's important that we recognize that standing up for human rights is not only the right thing to do because we should care about our fellow human beings. It's also a way to create a more secure, a more stable world. I've seen, I've been involved in a lot of different human rights causes over the years, and I just, I always wonder, by an accident of fate. I was born in Worcester, Massachusetts, right? I can say whatever I want to say, and I can worship any way I want to worship, and nothing's going to happen to me. Everybody should have that right. And if the roles were reversed, and I was, in Lhasa right now, and somebody there was in Worcester, Massachusetts, I would hope that they would care about what was going on, what was happening to me. And I'll just close with this. A few years back, I visited Sudan. I was trying to get into Sudan, and I because there was a terrible genocide going on there, and I couldn't get in, so I went to Chad, and I went to some of the refugee camps where a lot of Sudanese civilians had fled to because of the terrible violence against them. And when I was there, the International Criminal Court was taking depositions from people who had witnessed violence and terrible things for their case against the president of Sudan, President Bashir. And I remember this woman telling this terrible story about how she had witnessed her entire family being murdered in front of her. And when it was all over with, I went up to her, and I didn't really know what to say. I just said, thank you for telling us what you did, because it's important, and hopefully it will protect lives. And I remember she said to me, if I thought nobody would care about any of this, then I would have taken my life. But I believe that people, when they hear the truth, will care and will demand justice and will demand that things change. And that's the only thing that can keep me going. And I'm haunted by those words. And I've talked to a lot of people in the Tibetan community who have lost, whose family members have disappeared, who have suffered terribly, who can't be who they are, who can't worship the way they want to worship, who can't practice their language or their culture. And it's just so wrong. And so, look, again, this is not this is not against the people of China. This is a statement to the Chinese government that things have to change. And if they don't change, there's going to be a consequence. That's kind of a long answer to your question. I'm sorry.
No, I think that was a great answer. I think that in particular your anecdote about the woman in Chad, I think although she is miles and oceans apart from those inside Tibet, I'm sure her story would resonate with many people inside Tibet today. So thank you for sharing that with us. So the next question we have today is from Rubio.
Hello, Congressman. My name is Rajam. I'm from Connecticut, San Diego, to study at American University there. And my question to you today is, Tibetan Americans and Tibetan supporters around the world have been working in solidarity with our Uyghurs, Taiwanese, Mongolian, and Hong Konger friends for many years at different capacities. And I know that as the co-chair for the CECC, your office has worked extensively with many cross-movement oppressed peoples and worked with a wide range of groups. And I would like to know, what do you think is the future of cross-movement solidarity work moving forward?
I think it's essential. I think it's vital in order to be effective. Look, for those of us who care about human rights, and I know I'm including all of you as well, I mean, when we talk about human rights in China, we're talking about the human rights of all people, not just the Tibetan community, not just the Uyghur community, not just those who are struggling, for their rights in Hong Kong, not just the human rights defenders in Beijing. We're talking about everybody's human rights. And by the way, not just human rights in China, but human rights everywhere in the world, including the human rights of everybody here in the United States of America. Look, there's power in unity. And the cause of the Tibetans is the cause of the Uyghurs, and the cause of the Uyghurs is the cause of the Tibetans. I mean, we're all in this together. And, our goal is, again, to stand up for the human rights of all people. And, I think, if we're not unified, then it's easier for the Chinese government to isolate and undermine particular voices or movements. It's harder for them to do that when we're all standing, arm in arm as we move forward. And so I mean, I have seen, the cross movement solidarity work intensify and be enhanced over the last, couple of years. And that's a good thing. And I just want it to continue to stay strong and unified and continue to grow because I think it's very, very important.
Thank you, Congressman. And I just wanted to point out actually that Rubio is actually the current president of the SFT chapter at your alma mater, also my alma mater as well, American University.
It's great. I really enjoyed my time at American University. I also, when I was at American University, was involved in a lot of activism on human rights issues in El Salvador, because it was in 1980, Archbishop Romero was assassinated in El Salvador. We did a lot of work on fighting against apartheid in South Africa, because apartheid was was the form of government at that time that was imposing a brutal kind of terrible system against so many South Africans. But I really love my time at AU. I hope you do. I hope you. Well, I know you did. I mean, but I hope you're enjoying it as well.
I am.
Awesome. Well, we have one more question. And before the question, though, I wanted to acknowledge that there are a lot of comments of support from people around the U.S. supporting you, Congressman McGovern, and from around the world as well. And we also have some Hong Kong activists watching live, and they were sending messages of support as well.
Well,
And so
I'm in awe of all of you and my friends, my Hong Kong activists. I'm in awe of them too. Look, it doesn't take any courage for a United States congressperson to advocate what I'm advocating for or to say what I'm saying. But as you know, for many Tibetans, for those brave men and women in Hong Kong who are standing up for their rights, I mean, they're risking everything. And it takes an enormous amount of courage. And I'm in awe of their commitment and their dedication and their passion. And I think the least we all can do is stand in solidarity with them and provide some wind at their back, because they're on the right side of history.
Absolutely. And I have to go shortly, Congressman McGovern. But for our last question, I want to pass it over to Chukila.
Hi. So not to go off track, but in recent months we have seen a completely unprecedented global pandemic that was largely spurred by the CCP's lack of transparency. And we've seen world leaders from many nations taking a stand to hold the CCP accountable for their censorship and lack of freedom. So, with your experience and insight, I wanted to ask, what do you think the impact of the pandemic will be on the climate of American politics in the coming years?
So I want the well, one is, I mean, we need to demand transparency. I mean, of not only the Chinese government, but of all governments, quite frankly, especially in the middle of a pandemic. I mean, we need to know what the facts are. We need to share information. I mean, because quite frankly, in a pandemic, there's no borders. I mean, we have, as of today, I think over 70,000 Americans have died. I mean, and I mean, this is a horrible, horrible thing. So we need to figure out ways to better share information, to be more transparent and honest with one another. Because, I mean, I believe that healthcare is a human rights issue, and I believe that the ability to make sure that people get the care they need is also a fundamental human rights issue. I also think that it's important to get to the truth. I can't tell you with any certainty what happened. I can't tell you exactly, how this terrible pandemic, became what it is today. I mean, there's lots of speculation and there's lots of, information out there. Some of it is sound information, some of it is not so sound. And so I think before people jump to conclusions, we need to do a methodical investigation to figure out what the truth is. But I also worry that, because it's not just in China, but it's other places in the world, that there are some governments, some authoritarian governments, some very repressive governments that are using the pandemic, where all of our attention is right now, to do some terrible things, within their borders, that they're increasing repression, that they're increasing arrests, and even in some places disappearances and murders. And I think it's important that all of us who care about human rights, we have to do both. We have to worry about the pandemic. We have to make sure that we're advocating for the right policies here in this country. But we also have to let governments that are being repressive know that we're not taking our eye off of what's happening there. We know what's happening in China. You mentioned Hong Kong a little bit earlier. We know that they're cracking down on Hong Kong activists and human rights advocates, and we know that's happening to Tibetans. We know it's happening to Uyghurs. We know they're trying to use the pandemic as a way to refocus our attention away from their brutal policy. We can't let that happen. We're going to have to walk and chew gum at the same time. We're going to have to we have to understand that everything is important. And so look, I mean, as I said before, I mean, we are, with your help, and ICT's help, and the Tibetan government exiles help, and with activism all across the country, we have created a bipartisan consensus that we need to do something meaningful on Tibet. And we've taken the first step in the House. We now need the Senate to follow suit, take this up, and we need to get something to the president's desk. And we need to deal in facts and in truth, because if we start, if we stray away from the facts, then we lose credibility. So we have to, and that's one of the things I admire about all the work that so many of you have been doing, is that it's based on fact, on personal testimonies, on what the reality is, and that is so very, very powerful. And then again, we have to insist that China be more forthcoming, but quite frankly, the whole world has to be more forthcoming as we deal with this pandemic.
Absolutely. Thank you, Congressman McGovern. And I know that the time is just about up for us today, but I wanted to take a final moment to acknowledge, your leadership on Capitol Hill for all the human rights and Tibet-related initiatives, as well as, thank all of the members of Congress that have shown tremendous bipartisan support for Tibet and, support for holding the Chinese government accountable, as you said, and demanding transparency of course, the pandemic has, been used as an excuse to sweep Tibet and human rights in Hong Kong under the rug. But today, more than ever, cross-movement oppressed peoples have been standing together, and I think we will continue bringing these issues like TPSA to the front of the discussion. And after you leave today, we will also be going over, some more concrete actions that viewers today, our 150 plus viewers today, can do and take directly, such as, like reaching out to their senators and also asking their community and friends to reach out to their senators as well. So thank you so much, Congressman McGovern. We also have a lot of folks saying Tashi Delek to you as well from online.
And thank you for giving me the privilege of working with me, and to everybody here. Thank you for what you're doing. I mean, this is truly meaningful work. It is making a difference. We would not be having this discussion if it wasn't for the activism that so many of you have been involved with for a while now. So just know that. I mean, this is in response to your advocacy, and I really appreciate it. And everybody be safe, please. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Congressman.
Bye.
Bye. Awesome. So that was really great to have a discussion with Congressman McGovern, and I think that the youth leaders had some incredible questions for the Congressman as well. I am sorry, I know a lot of folks had hoped to do some questions, but it seems like we didn't have enough time for that today. Before we do leave today, I'm asking folks to stay on for a little bit longer. We're going to hear a little bit from the youth leaders about, after the discussion and after all the talks we've done about TPSA and reading about why TPSA is such an important piece of legislation. These young people in the next few days are all going to be taking action in their respective communities to help get TPSA passed through Senate. And so I wanted to just go around and maybe all the young people can just share a few words about what their own personal plans are, and hopefully the viewers at home can get some ideas of, cool grassroots ideas or initiatives that they can take themselves from quarantine, from safety, to help push this bill along. And then after we hear from them, we're also going to share about the letter sending resource that SFT has created for everyone. So I guess we can start off by hearing a little bit from, let's start from Kyla.
Yeah, so in terms of TPSA here in Colorado, of course, like using my own personal platform, however, small it is, to try and get people in my community and my network to get involved. And I know that SFT has created a link where you can just, type in your name, your email, your address, and then it automatically sends a letter to your senator on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee to support TPSA this coming Thursday. And that doesn't necessarily have to be coming from solely their constituents. That can be coming from, the more the better. Higher quantity means more visibility. And I know that the Tibetan Association of Colorado sent out an email to all its community members. We'll be posting on our social media to try and get, a lot of, allies and other people that aren't Tibetan that are involved in the community to kind of get on board with those things, as well as, with our Tibetan school, cultural school in Boulder, and getting those individuals to kind of sign on and participate as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Kyla. So Kyla is using her, platform as a youth leader in the Tibetan community in Colorado to use the Tibetan Association platform to actually start to get more and collect more and more support and signatures for people to send letters to their senators. So that's great. And Colorado, as all the states of the youth leaders that are here today, all have senators that are, sitting on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So any, Tibetans tuning in from Colorado or from other states that are on the list, making sure to, get as many people from your state to send in letters as well. So maybe next we can pass it on to Chucky from Wisconsin.
So similar to what Kyla said, I want to encourage my fellow college students, both non and Tibetan students, to kind of be more aware about TPSA and what it does for Tibet, get more people to sign the petition. I also want to work with the Tibetan Association here, and hopefully they can post stuff on their social medias and send out emails as well.
Thank you, Chugla. And Rubjam?
As said before, I'm going to be using my own resources that are available, such as social media, and I'll also be in contact with the Tibetan Association of Connecticut to kind of spread a message to younger folks and the community at large too.
Thanks, Rabjam. And Justin?
Anything you can do to raise awareness for the bill can make positive change. I think anyone can be an activist, anyone can be an active citizen. So write, call, email your representatives, and write, call, and email your relatives to get them to call their representatives too. Your friends, your family, everyone can be an advocate for positive change. So just don't be afraid to reach out and try and garner more support for the Tibetan Policy and Support Act.
Definitely, and families are huge. I know, Justin, you've brought in your sister, your brother, your grandmother, like all of them into the movement and learn more about Tibet. So I think everyone, after this call is over, should call up their grandmother and say hello, but also ask them to send in a letter to their senator if they're based in the U.S. And Tsiringla from Earlham in Indiana, what are some ways that you're hoping to get the TPSA letter out to some of your community members?
So in Indiana, I don't know about any Tibetan communities living here, but in my college we have me and my co-year as Tibetan, and then we have another friend helping with this SFT. So I think reaching out to my friends and then like them reaching out to their friends, so in that way it'll become like a bigger platform to spread out about TPSA, and also giving a clear idea to the audience of what they are fighting for, like what TPSA really is, and giving them a guideline of how to sign the petition is also like easy. It makes it easier for them to sign up. So yeah, and then like social media becomes the mode of communication for that. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Tsering. I think that Tsering and Rabjam both mentioned a really great point is that social media, especially during the quarantine, people spend a lot of time on social media. And it's such a great way to just send a link and, explain in a couple words to your friends why this is an important bill. And I think for a lot of young people, especially college students like Justin and was saying as well, and everyone on this call, like we have a lot of friends and networks, even folks that are not Tibetan, but they care a lot about human rights and freedom of speech in Tibet and religious freedom, and even asking those folks to sign. So, for example, if you are a college student or if you live in Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, Florida, Georgia, Idaho, Indiana, Kentucky, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New Mexico, Oregon, Ohio, South Carolina, Texas, Utah, Virginia, Wisconsin, or Wyoming. So that's a pretty long list, actually. So I'm sure a lot of our viewers have family or live or go to school in one of these states. If you can please, ask those people in your community to go online and send them the link and send in a letter to their member of Congress, their senator, because this coming Thursday, their senator will be sitting in a room and discussing TPSA, the exact bill, that we've been talking about for, all day today so far, pretty much. And as we've discussed, there are so many reasons why TPSA is a really powerful bill. And if passed, it would make a tremendous difference for not just Tibetan Americans, but Tibetans around the world and, human rights supporters around the world, especially those inside Tibet and Buddhists around the world. So if you can visit SFT's website, we're going to do a screen share in just a moment. And as you can see, this is our website at Students for Free Tibet. And if you click on the Tibet Policy and Support Act link, which we can just show you on the screen right now, you will come up to this page. And we've actually done it in a way to make it as simple and straightforward as possible. And we have the whole list of states as well on the website, in case you didn't catch it when I said it just now. And so when you click on the link, you'll actually be taken to this page where we've done, we've done the work of putting together a letter that you can send to your senator. And there's also a section where you can personalize your message if you feel like, you have a strong message that you must share with your senator. Or some additional, messaging from yourself personally, then you just fill out your information here. And this is kind of the most important part, because when you send it in, if you are, like let's say, for example, if you are living in Massachusetts, but you study in Wisconsin, making sure that you can send in a letter to your senator in Wisconsin or, something like that, making sure you send in letters to senators that are sitting on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and, also need more encouragement possibly to support TPSA. And together we think that our community, we have over 100 people watching today, and if everyone shares this link with 10 of their friends, we could possibly send in over 1,000 letters to Senate in just a matter of days. I think the most important thing to highlight is that it's really coming up very fast. This Thursday, it's like 3 days from now, there's going to be a group of senators sitting at a table and discussing about reincarnation process for His Holiness, about an embassy inside a U.S. embassy and consulate in Lhasa, about supporting the Tibetan government in exile. So that's a really big deal, and we have the opportunity today to make a difference for that. Whether you're a college student or a Tibetan American elder, or if you have family in the U.S., anyone can make a difference. Just send the link. You can visit our website, and all the information is over there. And we're really grateful to have these youth leaders that are taking a leadership role in their states that are all key states. And I think if they have any messages to share, they can also share a message with the audience. But I think, speaking for myself, as a young person, as a youth leader, it's really important for us to encourage each other to take action on this issue. So I guess I'll just open up the floor. If any of the youth leaders have any final words of encouragement for those watching from home today, that would be great. I guess we can start with Tsering, and then we can go down the line and see if anyone has any final words or wants to say goodbye.
Thank you all for watching the live and get to know more about TPSA. And I think it's a great opportunity to support for Tibet. From just sending an email to your senator, and even though it can be seen as a small email, but that makes a huge difference, and it can impact on who we about the reincarnation of Dalai Lama, which is a big thing for all the Tibetans. So yeah, I hope everybody take the responsible for taking in charge of it. And thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us, Tsering La. And Kyla?
Yeah, I think, well, first, thank you, Pema, for organizing and facilitating it, because I think it was done really well. And I know it was, done in a short time frame organizing this. But I think it's just really awesome, the idea that, we can, each have a part in creating this really big change that's going to have a huge implication in the future, in the long term and the short term. And I think to be able to kind of feel like you're part of a community and that you can make a difference. And there's this really broad network that spans, national and international. And I think that's pretty invigorating and motivating. And I think it's awesome that especially young Tibetans and non-Tibetans who play a huge role in advocacy for Tibetan issues can make this kind of difference.
Thank you. Rabjam?
Again, thank you so much for holding this entire talk show. It's been really productive, and I really appreciate you reaching out to me, and thankful for participating in this. I just urge everyone that's watching this video and friends of you guys to take action and to reach out to your senators that are on the committee. Even the smallest action has an impact on the entire Tibetan movement, and that's all I can say right now.
Thank you, Rabjam. And Chukila? Chuki?
I just want to say thank you to everyone for watching, and thank you, Bema, for organizing all this. And then I really hope everybody learned a lot from this discussion or got motivated from it. And I encourage everyone to email or text their friends and family the link to the petition, and everybody signs it.
Thank you, Chuki. And Justin?
Yeah, like everyone said, I'm just so thankful to be a part of this community and be able to be here and talk with everyone. I've never talked to a congressman like that via computer. It was really cool. And I just want everyone to know that they can make a difference. Everybody has the power to make positive change. So don't give up. Don't give up hope. And I want to share a quote by Rebecca Solnit. Hope is an axe to break down doors with in an emergency. So don't give up hope. Keep wielding that axe of hope, and you can make change in this world. So thank you all. Bye.
That's incredible. Thank you for the inspiring quote to end us off with today, Justin. And again, the website link is the link for the letters on our website, and we'll also be sharing it on our SFT page and social media shortly after. So thank you everyone for tuning in, and thank you so much to our youth leaders from the five of the key states around the U.S. for joining us today. And together, I know that we can make a huge difference leading up, and it's really a grassroots collective effort. None of us can do it alone, but together, we can't fail. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Take care.
You too.